If you ever feel out of control around food, you're not alone, and you're in the right place to learn practical, no-nonsense information about why you binge and how to stop. Binge eating does not mean that something is wrong with you. It's a natural but primitive brain response that you can correct. If you're ready for change, sign up for the Brain Over Binge self-paced online course for less than $20 per month. And if you feel you need personalized support, we also offer one-on-one coaching and group coaching. To learn more, go to brainoverbinge.com/subscribe. And I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to the Brain Over Binge podcast, where you learn a simple, brain-based approach to ending binge eating. I'm really happy to be with you today. I'm Katherine Hansen, your host, and I want to help you free yourself of the struggle with food. If you're new to Brain Over Binge, you can go back and listen to the first 11 episodes, which contain the basics of how I help people stop binging. This approach is all about understanding the patterns of your brain and discovering your own power to overcome those patterns. I've created a free resource to help you implement these principles in your own life. It's called the Brain Over Binge Inspiration Booklet, and you can use it every day to help keep the Brain Over Binge concepts in the front of your mind as you work on recovery. This booklet contains 31 daily messages and reminders to help you stay committed to letting go of binge eating. You can download the free Inspiration Booklet through the link in the show description. Today is going to be one of those episodes where I just share some of my thoughts with you that I hope will give you some guidance as you learn to eat normally and avoid binges. I've titled this show Stop and Go Signals. I've talked about hunger and fullness signals in this podcast in the past, including in the previous episode on reclaiming fullness, and I've included a link to that episode in the show description. But this episode will be a little different. Our physical signals of hunger and fullness aren't the same as what I'm calling our stop and go signals when it comes to food. What I'm calling go signals are primarily thoughts, but also feelings and sensations that drive us to eat or keep eating, and they're independent of actual physical hunger signals. And the reason I say primarily thoughts is that the more physical feelings and sensations are more indicative of actual hunger. But you can definitely still have physical sensations encouraging eating when you're not truly hungry. So for example, a go signal could be when you've finished eating a meal and you've had plenty of food, and you may even have some dessert after, but then your thoughts keep telling you to eat more, even though you're full. Or a go signal could be when you're not even hungry at all, but you see some delicious food or you're offered some delicious food, and your thoughts and cravings encourage you to have some. The most extreme go signals are the urges to binge, which encourage you to eat so far past fullness that it's painful. What I'm calling the stop signals are, again, primarily thoughts, but also feelings and sensations that tell us to stop eating that are also independent of actual hunger or fullness. The stop signals I'm talking about primarily show up if you are restricting. I'm not talking about stop signals after you've had a reasonable, nourishing amount of food. I'm talking about when you're actually hungry or you physically need more food, but you think and believe that you should stop eating in order to control your weight. A lot of the time, the stop signals are very self-critical and come with a lot of guilt. Like, it's bad to eat this and I need to stop eating this now. What these signals show us is that our thoughts and feelings encouraging us to eat or eat more are not always based on hunger. And on the other hand, our thoughts and feelings encouraging us to stop eating are not always based in fullness. This is something that people with or without a current or past eating disorder have to deal with, especially in the modern food environment that we live in. Highly processed, highly stimulating, highly pleasurable foods can turn up our food desires, can increase our food thoughts, and can really rev up our cravings. In other words, these type of foods can increase the go signals around food. I'll also say that those very same foods can also create some of these unhealthy stop signals in our minds as well, if we tell ourselves that these foods are bad or that we should not eat them, or if we're worried that they'll lead to weight gain. It's common to hear the analogy of eating being like filling the gas tank of your car. And I want to talk about this a little bit because this analogy could work if we're strictly talking about hunger and fullness. Like, yes, you fill your stomach or your gas tank when it gets low. But when we're talking about these stop and go signals and not strictly about hunger and fullness, this analogy doesn't really hold up. There's just so much more to human food decisions and consumption, especially with all of these modern foods that we have available. Cars don't face tempting food options on a daily basis or get offered tempting food, or I guess in this case it would be fuel at social events, or have fuel that interacts with their body to make cravings and desires stronger. Basically, we're facing a lot more challenges than a car that simply needs that energy to run. And I think it's really important for everyone in recovery to come to terms with this and face the fact that there are not just hunger and fullness signals, that there are also these stop and go signals that we all have to deal with. And this does not make you broken or mean that something is wrong with you. And I know I'm always reminding you of that on the show, but I think it's so important to realize that you're not alone in this, and it doesn't mean you're not capable of learning to eat normally. Everyone, with or without an eating disorder, has to deal with the effect that modern food has on the brain's reward system. And everyone also has to deal with these messages telling us that certain foods are unhealthy, so we should stop eating them. Now, I will say that even though everyone has some form of these stop and go signals, they can be a lot stronger in people who struggle with binging and also with restricting. And also because restriction leads to binging, when the stop signals are strong and you have a lot of voices telling you you should not eat enough, you should not eat certain foods, then those go signals can get even stronger, which can lead to those urges to binge, and then you end up in that awful restrict binge cycle. So far, I've set up basically what these stop and go signals are, and the fact that these signals are something you'll have to learn to deal with both in recovery and after recovery. And now I want to dive a little deeper into why we have them. The stop and go signals are primal or primitive brain signals. They're part of a system in our brain that has helped humans survive by motivating us to seek out the behaviors that are necessary for our existence. And eating is basically on the top of that list. Our primitive brain's reward system has three basic goals. The first is to survive, the second is to seek pleasure, and the third is to avoid pain. And some experts also add a fourth goal, that is to exert as little effort as possible. Now, when we're talking about hunger and fullness signals, it's more about that first goal of survival. But of course, eating also brings pleasure and helps us avoid the pain of hunger. When it comes to stop and go signals, it's no longer just about basic survival. The go signals, those thoughts telling you to eat more, are more about meeting that primitive goal of seeking pleasure and also avoiding any discomfort that comes with craving. The stop signals are a little less clear as far as being a primitive drive. I actually think the stop signals are more from the conditioning of our culture and the messages we've received about the way we should look or how we should eat. While it's fine to want to eat well and nourish ourselves, when we make ourselves stop eating or not eat in the first place when we actually do need the food, this goes against our survival. But it can also feel like it's helping us fulfill other needs, like being accepted in social groups because of the way our body looks. And that can seem like it's helping fulfill some of those primal needs for pleasure and pain avoidance. Whether we're talking about the go signals or the stop signals, a very important thing to know is something that I often remind you of on this podcast, and that is that your higher brain, your more rational human brain, has the capacity to override any messages coming from that primitive brain, and that includes these stop and go signals. If you know you need to eat enough food to recover, but your thoughts keep telling you to stop so that you can restrict and lose weight, you can absolutely keep eating in spite of that. You can learn to be aware of your brain's own patterns. You can notice the thoughts that arise. You can know that these stop signals are faulty, and you can nourish yourself anyway. And it's the same for the go signals. Of course, you should allow for food enjoyment, but you can also recognize that when you eat certain foods, your brain may tell you to go, and eat excessively, and even to binge. But you can use your higher brain to control your actions in spite of these signals. This is something I think should be taught to us from a very young age, especially like I've talked about with the modern foods that we're faced with. I know people are quick to blame the food manufacturers, and yes, there is some responsibility there, but this podcast is not about that. It's about helping you take back your own power and realize that any go signals that you're having around these foods are not destiny. It's vital to accept that you will have these signals and not to be scared of them. I think what often happens is that people are around tempting foods or they eat tempting foods and then they have these thoughts telling them to eat more, more, more. And they think, oh my gosh, what's wrong with me? Why do I want so much of these foods? Why does my brain tell me to keep eating? I just don't think this line of thinking is productive. We should be taught to think, oh, of course my brain is signaling me to eat more of this highly pleasurable, highly stimulating food because my brain is wired for pleasure. Of course I'm having these more thoughts, but these go signals and these feelings of wanting are safe. I can learn to feel desire and to have these thoughts and still be okay and still have a choice. I want to take a quick break from this discussion to tell you about the first sponsor of the Brain Over Binge podcast, AquaTrue. I know my listeners are very health conscious, but when it comes to taking care of yourself, food is not the only factor. To avoid harmful food obsessions, it can be helpful to turn attention to some other factors that may improve your well-being. One of those factors is hydration with quality water, which is why I encourage you to check out AquaTrue. AquaTrue's proprietary purification technology is independently tested to remove over 80 of the most harmful contaminants, including chlorine, fluoride, arsenic, PFAS known as forever chemicals, nitrate, and many more. They have water purifiers to fit every type of home, from installation-free countertop purifiers to higher capacity under-sink options. Just one set of filters from their classic purifier makes the equivalent of 4,500 bottles of water, and it's less than 3 cents a bottle. It's even portable, making it perfect for renters or college dorms. In addition to drinking water, you can use it for your coffee, tea, and all of your cooking needs from boiling pasta or veggies to making stocks and soups. It definitely makes my tea taste so much better, my family loves it, and we no longer have to worry about harmful chemicals in our tap water. AquaTrue comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee, and today my listeners receive 20% off any AquaTrue purifier. Just go to aquatrue.com, that's AQUATRU.com, and enter code BOB at checkout. That's 20% off any AquaTrue water purifier when you go to aquatrue.com and use promo code BOB. And now back to the show. Even after recovery, you may have something like a cookie, and your brain will likely want another one. And that doesn't mean there's a problem. You can feel those go signals, you can understand them, you can know that it doesn't mean you're broken, and then you can decide to have another cookie or not. Now, I will say that after you stop the binge eating habit, these go signals are so much less strong, and the idea of continuing to eat and eat, let's say like the whole pack of cookies, that just seems like the opposite of pleasure, but you'll still have those go signals to a much lesser extent. So I want you to have the proper expectations that you're still going to have desires for a little more and some extra food pleasure. But again, these signals do not have to dictate what you choose to do. I thought of an example recently regarding primarily these go signals and how we need to expect them and be more accepting of them, but also not let them lead us into harmful actions. The example that came to mind has to do with sports, and I know I've used sports examples on the podcast before, and I'm going to use one again here today because I love sports and I think there are so many life lessons to be learned there, and it's also pretty timely as well with the Olympics going on. So those of you who read Brain Over Binge know that I ran track and cross country in high school and college, and now my daughter is actually running track in high school. And just as an aside, my running got wrapped up in very unhealthy weight obsessions and eventually resulted in many injuries and stress fractures and an inability to continue to compete. And to my daughter's credit, she's participating in this sport in a vastly healthier way than I did, and I'm so thankful for that. The point of this story is that me and my daughter had a conversation recently about stop signals while running. We talked about the fact that every single race that we've ever run, our thoughts try to convince us to stop. And although I haven't had in-depth conversations about this with too many people, I really don't think it's just me and my daughter. I think this is extremely common, and I'm sure a lot of you can relate to this if you participate in sports. As I've talked about, the brain wants to survive, it wants to seek pleasure, and it wants to avoid pain. So exerting yourself strenuously in a race for seemingly no reason at all to your brain, it's not like there's a lion chasing you or something, is really the opposite of pleasure, and it's very painful, and it's also against that fourth goal that I talked about of exerting as little effort as possible. So it only makes sense that the brain tells us to stop. Sometimes this voice and feeling encouraging you to stop is very loud, sometimes it's quiet, but it's always there. Me and my daughter both talked about how we have a lot of justifications for stopping too. It's just kind of something you learn to expect, and you still finish the race in spite of all this going on in your brain. And I know it's not just runners. Now, I'm sure maybe there are some extremely mentally strong people out there who don't have these stop signals when performing something strenuous. Maybe the Olympians are like that, I don't know. But I think the majority of people probably do have these stop signals, but they perform the physical endeavor anyway. And the better you get at overriding those stop signals, the better you get at your sport. So even if the Olympians do have these stop signals, they are really good at pushing through them anyway. The brain does want comfort and safety, but if you want to grow and improve, you have to push your own limits and get out of your comfort zone. Of course, sometimes there are real reasons for needing to stop in a race or any athletic event, but that's rare and extreme. What I'm talking about here is what happens the majority of the time when you simply keep racing or keep performing the sport in spite of the thoughts telling you to stop. I'm going to bring this back to eating now to say that eating a delicious, highly stimulating food is kind of like the opposite of running a race. Instead of the brain saying stop, stop, stop in a race, it says go, go, go for more food because it wants that pleasure. But that never has to stop you from eating a reasonable amount of it, just like those stop signals don't have to stop you from finishing a race. You simply understand that those signals will be there, and you do what you have to do anyway, whether that's finishing the race or putting away the bag of chips after a reasonable amount. When you aim to eat a food that's challenging for you, you can know that you're going to eat a reasonable amount of it no matter what your brain says. Just like when you start a race, you know you're going to finish it regardless of what your brain tells you. Now, the race may not look pretty, the eating may not be perfect, but you're just going to do your best and not listen to those thoughts that try to distract you from your goal. The last insight around this racing analogy that I'll talk about here is that you absolutely can be selective about the races you choose to run or the foods you choose to eat. I would never tell my daughter, who primarily runs the mile, to sign up for a marathon and then just ignore all her thoughts telling her to stop. I mean, that would be foolish. The takeaway when it comes to food is to just go at your own pace with eating foods that bring up some challenging go signals. You may not feel ready for certain foods right now, and it's okay. It's fine to be strategic until you get more practice. This goes for the stop signals when it comes to food as well. It's possible that you've developed some food fears over time and your brain is really telling you not to eat them, or when you do eat them, you feel this extreme guilt and your brain says to stop eating them. It can be a gradual process to learn that you can choose to eat any food and override this guilt and these stop signals, but you don't have to start eating anything and everything right away. The overall message in my discussion today is that your stop and go signals are definitely a normal function of the primitive part of your brain, but you can use your higher brain to override these signals to make the choices that you want to make, and you can do that with self-awareness and self-compassion. I hope that what I've talked about today will help you learn to eat a fear food that you want to add back into your life, or learn to stop eating a food that's challenging for you after a normal amount of it. Before I end today, I have a quick announcement that on Friday, August 23rd, from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Coach Julie is going to host the Brain Over Binge Retreat. This is a virtual event where you'll learn practical and powerful mindfulness-based strategies that are tailored specifically toward freeing yourself from binging. Plus, you'll receive personalized coaching from Julie. Tickets for the retreat will go on sale starting August 7th at brainoverbinge.com/retreat. So mark your calendars. I want you to know that this retreat will be free for all of the members of the Brain Over Binge group. Group members also get immediate access to the replay videos of Coach Julie's 2 previous retreats, plus all of the other amazingly supportive group resources. You can join the group at brainoverbinge.com/group. And you can learn more about the retreat at brainoverbinge.com/retreat. Both of those links are in the show description, along with links to the Brain Over Binge books, the online course, and one-on-one coaching. Thanks again for being here. As you learn to overcome these stop and go signals, I want to encourage you and remind you that you have the power to change your brain and live a binge-free life. The Brain Over Binge podcast is produced and recorded by Brain Over Binge Recovery Coaching, LLC. All work is copyrighted by Brain Over Binge Recovery Coaching, LLC, and all rights are reserved. As a disclaimer, the hosts of the Brain Over Binge podcast are not professional counselors or licensed healthcare providers, and this podcast is not a substitute for medical advice or any form of professional therapy. Eating disorders can have serious health consequences, and you are strongly advised to seek medical attention for matters relating to your health. Please get help when you need it, and good luck on your journey. Need more help? You can find all of our current and upcoming options for support at brainoverbinge.com.